2 weeks before our wedding 2 years ago, I got a call from my mom. Slowly, she said, "I have to tell you something. If Dad is still this sick in a week from now, I'm not sure if he'll be able to make it to your wedding." My dad's cancer had resurfaced about a month earlier. The thought had occurred to me that he might not make it to our wedding, but I hadn't really let myself consider that reality. So I called up a friend of mine who had lost his mom a few years earlier, and I asked him what I should do. And he said, "There's no way you'll regret it if you go to be with your family right now." So we booked a flight home. There were so many things my dad and I hadn't talked about directly or had tried to discuss, and the conversation failed. We had a lot of political differences, and even though we had written letters back and forth to try and better understand where each other was coming from, there was still a lot we didn't understand about one another. We had never talked about his drinking, ever, and it loomed large over the last decade of our relationship. And most fundamentally, I hated how distant we had become. It was love for him that kept things bottled up for so long. The love that would rather just dissolve our struggles with a hug than fortify them in a conversation. But I knew that strategy wasn't working any longer. So I started preparing myself to share some of the feelings that I'd kept bottled up for a long time, practicing my script out loud in the hope that it wasn't too late. He picked us up from the airport, and the first thing I noticed about him was how swollen his legs were, but somehow he was still able to drive. We got home, and I sat down in front of his chair, and then awkwardly, painfully, I stumbled through my script before I lost my nerve. I don't know what I expected exactly. Maybe that a flood of truth would pour out from both of us, or he'd reveal some deeper pain that he'd been carrying that would explain everything and make it okay, or put it in context. But that didn't happen. He looked up at me and said it was silly to let politics get between family, and he told me he wasn't drinking anymore anyway, because his liver was already hurting enough as it was. And that was it. And I thought to myself, is this what I psyched myself out about for the last 2 years? I started having regrets. Maybe if I had done this sooner, we could have had a real conversation. But now my time's run out. I had fantasies about teshuvah, about this encounter that was supposed to be all about settling scores, apologies, and forgiveness. I thought it would be this beautiful, heart-cracking open moment where truth was revealed, where finally we could have a shared understanding of each other's broken places. I thought, it's funny to even say it out loud now, I thought that just because I'm a rabbi, it means that I'm supposed to be good at this kind of stuff. But in that moment, when all of my fantasies and illusions about death and mortality were crashing around me, the mantra that kept me going from moment to moment, every time I wasn't sure what to do, was just 2 words: show up. I would ask myself, what does showing up look like for me right now? It wasn't just about jumping on a plane. Can I be in this hard conversation even when I don't have the perfect words? Can I just sit beside my dad and do crossword puzzles with him when words fail both of us? And then there would be moments where showing up was not possible. I would say, okay, this is getting kind of hard. I need a break. And I'd take a breath, I'd check my phone, walk the dog, and then I'd say, all right, let's show up again. And when I think about it now, this is exactly where teshuvah begins. Teshuvah, which we typically translate as returning, requires the first step of showing up. It means recognizing where we are in time and space. It requires reining in all of those thoughts about what things were supposed to look like and being fully present in this moment and what is being asked of us as it actually is. Not running away from the terrifying thing, not fantasizing about how we wanted this to play out differently, but looking this moment straight in the face without flinching. When I was there with my family as my dad was dying, I kept noticing the answer to this question, what does it mean to show up right now, didn't actually take any work or effort to figure out. It was painful and it was heartbreaking to show up in all of those moments and everything in between, but it wasn't difficult, meaning that all sense of choice was taken out of the equation. Now, in many ways, showing up in the ways we long to has become far more difficult and in some cases impossible. We would give anything to be able to easily jump on a plane right now, or even just to show up on the doorstep of our parents' house, our kids' house, our grandkids' house. We are now embodying a reality of galut, of exile, being scattered from one another like seed pods in the wind. Some of us may even feel a sense of karet, the biblical term for being cut off and severed from community and from any sense of connection to holiness, family, friends, work, purpose, or hope. I feel all of this too. When I get overwhelmed and feel distant, my first instinct is often to cocoon inside myself rather than reach out for help. And I think that's true for a lot of us, and it's normal. It is built into our nature as human beings from the very beginning, from our very first moment of tshuva. After Adam and Eve ate from the fruit of the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden, one of the first things they discovered was their nakedness, how vulnerable they actually were. And that vulnerability was so scary and felt so shameful. They heard the faintest sound of God's presence in the wind rustling through the garden, and their first instinct was to hide themselves. They said, "No one can see me like this, especially God." But God called out to them in that soft breeze with a question. Ayekah, where are you? It was not a question of location. God knew exactly where they were in space. It was a question calling them and us to presence, to come out from hiding and show up in our own naked vulnerability. God asks them, and I imagine this question coming gently, lovingly, just like the wind. Who told you you were naked? Who told you that the way you are right now is not exactly as I created you? This is how I made you. There is no need to hide. It is so hard right now living in quarantine. And we have so many ways to numb ourselves and to hide even further. Scrolling on our phones, binge watching, drinking alcohol, whatever your self-medication of choice happens to be. But showing up is still possible. It's just going to look a lot different than it did before. The part of us that longs to connect is so much stronger and so much more powerful than the part that wants to hide. The answer to Ayekah is Hineini. Here I am, ready to meet this next moment as it is unfolding. To show up first for myself, not hiding from what's true for me in any given moment, and then to open to others through that connection. What I have seen over and over again during the short 2.5 months that I have been at Or Hadash is that people desperately want to help and give of themselves. We don't want to live cut off from each other. We want to be asked to assist with a project. We want to feel needed and useful and that we have something valuable to contribute. We don't always have the strength to volunteer, but when called upon, when asked, Ayekah, where are you? Are you ready? We want to be able to rise to the moment in whatever way we can. So here is what showing up looks like in this new reality, from where I sit. Just a few of the many, many examples. It looks like sending an email that says, I'm really not doing okay right now, and I just needed you to know that. It looks like finding safe ways, when possible, to be together in person in small groups. It looks like going to a Zoom funeral, even though it is nowhere close to being there in person. It looks like dropping off a tray of sweets to a Shiva house, even when we can't go inside, and those brief moments of connection from 6 feet apart. And it looks like a phone call saying, hey, had an idea for Shabbat services next week, and I didn't want to bother you because I know you're busy, but can I share it? This is my vision for Or Hadash in a nutshell. To nurture a community where all of us can show up and be seen in all of our glorious diversity and vulnerability. Where we show up for one another in celebration and in grieving in whatever ways we can. Where we enter into a period of learning about ourselves and about one another, even if we have known each other for years. Where we won't always have the answers and we won't always agree, but we will continue to lift up the questions with and for one another and see where they lead us. All of you made a choice to show up today for some reason. Maybe it's because you do this every year, and there's no other place you'd be on the cusp of the new year. Maybe a friend or a family member brought you, or you found us online. Maybe you're here because you're grieving too, the loss of your health, or of someone you love, or a relationship that has become strained or broken. And the fact that you're here is huge. Just making it here is incredible. So I invite you to drop whatever script you came in with and step into this moment, knowing that what's right here in front of you is what's most important. Even if you aren't feeling it emotionally yet, that's okay, and it's normal. It takes time for the soul to wake up. Sometimes when you just push yourself a little bit to show up physically, then over time, the heart follows and returns. Hashivenu v'nashuva. Bring us back together, and we shall return. Chadesh yamenu kekedem. Teach us how to start again. Shana Tova.